Hi everyone, welcome back to Code Pro series. In this video, we will learn the difference between debug and release modes in Visual Studio using a live demo with csharpprogramming. You will learn when to use each mode, what happens behind the scenes, and how your code behaves differently. Agenda of this video is what is a debug mode, what is a release mode, what is a trace mode, code demo summary, how to switch modes in Visual Studio, debug versus release folder output, real world use cases, debug versus release, comparison, and the best practices. Let's start it with debug mode. This is a default configuration when you are writing and testing code. And this is used during development purpose. So when we are developing some software, so we need to know what the variables values and how does it the flow works from where and where. With the help of debugging, we can figure it out the information of the variables, values of the variables, and the flow as well. It contains debug informations. So when you develop or build your application, so in the folder, debug folder, there is .db file is created. So this file is nothing but it's a symbol files, and its full form is program database file. So it holds a debug and project state informations, and it supports debug mode, supports breakpoints, a quick watch, step by step watch, so you can able to understand the value of the variable. So it also have no compiler optimization, so it will easy to debug. And in this debug mode, Visual Studio compiles your code with additional information that helps you to debug. So it basically to figure it out more on like where your error is happen. So with the help of debug mode, you can figure it out your error messages, and you can check runtime variables. Think in real world example, think of debug mode as writing a pencil. You are still testing things, and you might need to erase and correct errors quickly. So let's do some C# code. So last time we have written a hello world console app. So we are going to use the same app, same program class file, same method, main method. In that only we will write for debug as well. So for the debug, use will be using debug keyword. So for that, you will say as if debug So you need to change, instead of debug, you need to change the debug. Basically, this solution, this configuration is by default is debug only. You don't need to change anything, and you can use debug libraries, debug functionalities. So you need to add using System.Diagnostic namespace. Within that, we are using debug functionality. And I will show you some variable actually where we can see the example of it is 4. Let's say sum equals to 4 plus 5. And so dot right line, and we will say sum of 4 and 5 is sum. Okay. Okay. I have to cast string. And okay. And okay, here I will say application start. And here I will say application end. So in this way, I can able to get to know like where my application start and end. Okay, let's put a breakpoint on line number 14 and start execute the application. So you can see the breakpoint debugger is on the line 14. Once I will click F10, so it will move next line. And okay, before moving forward, I will explain the lines breakpoints. So you can use multiple breakpoints in multiple lines. So I can put breakpoint on line number 18. I also put breakpoint on line number 24. I can use some of this functionalities. So if you do hit F11, it will step into. Step into means when if it is there, if you want to debug within the method. So if I call method over line 20, some method, so it will get into that method and it will debug all the lines of that method. And if I have to not want to go into the methods, so I have to hit F10. So it will F10 will be debug line by line. It will not go into the method and it will not debug within the method code. So in this way, you can use F11 and F10. And other than that, you can toggle breakpoint. So if I put a cursor on line number 14 and hit F9, so it will toggle. So it will remove the breakpoint from the line number 14. And if you want to disable all the breakpoints, so you have to use disable all breakpoint from the debug. You should go to the debug in the toolbar and select disable all the breakpoints. So it will disable your all the breakpoints. And if you want to come back, enable it. So you can choose enable all breakpoints. So it will enable all the breakpoints back. And if you want to delete all the breakpoints, so you can choose delete all breakpoints, shift control shift F9. So it will prompt you, do you want to delete all breakpoints? So yes. So after hitting yes, it will delete all the breakpoints from your application. Use breakpoints in this way. And that's the explanation of the breakpoint. Now let's move to the C# code sum equals to mode. See, in the debugger mode, I can able to know the value of the sum. but this is not cannot be able to see in the release mode. So I can see some, or I can use a quick watch as well. See quick watch. So you can see some values 9. You can put an add watch and quick watch like this. You can use in the debugger mode. So you can understand, you can able to know the variable values in your application. Application start running in debug mode. Sum of 4 and 5 is 9. Application end. Okay, you got the font now. So let's move to the next mode, is release mode. So what is release mode? So this is basically used for final build and deployment. So there is no debugging, no breakpoints, and it can be used much for optimize the code fast. It will provide the fast performance because we are not debugging our application code by code, and there is no additional code written for debug. So it will only execute only the release code only. No debugger codes are there actually can be executed, and so in that way the size of the application or entire code is very small. It will be executed and it will give a faster performance, and we cannot inspect variables during the runtime. So in real world analog, think of release mode like printing a final report. No comments, no draft, just the polished version you will send to your client or boss. So let's see in the Visual Studio. So currently we are in debug mode. So moving to a release mode. So from here we will change the release mode, and see, at the moment I change the release mode, this debug debugs code are gets gray out, and you also have to check, right click on the project file and do go on to the properties, and in build tab you have to check this has to be release mode, and here you have to write a release like this. Okay, so now you can write a release code. So the moment I add that release over in the property section, so you can able to see the release keyword. Else by default it's a debug mode, so there is only a debug keyword is there. But once you change in the property release, you write the release, so it can be release mode, but now you cannot see the debug. So that is the change we have made actually. So now it's in release mode, so we can able to see the release keyword. So we can use this release keyword, and if condition, and I will copy paste like this, but here I will say release mode. This is not in use. Save, and I will exit it. So here in release mode, you cannot do a debugging. So that's why there is a prompt from a warning is there basically. So I have to do basically not continue with the debugging, stop the debugging, and I will say just right click on this and say build. And once I have to go and open the project folder, Once you are in project folder, you can see obj folder. Within the obj folder, two folders are there, debug and release. So we are in the release as of now. So we will go to the release folder and you can see exe.exe file, application file is generated. So in the release, only release code will be executed, which is running in release mode within the release if and else. And that sum equals to 4 plus 5, it will, we cannot find the value or debug the code in the runtime. And in the debug code, it will not execute the debug code, only release code will be executed in the release mode. So if you go to the release folder, you can, there is exe, let's build, and once you build, exe will be generated, and let's execute that exe. Application start, you can see in the console application running in release mode, sum of 4 and 5 is 9, and application end. That's all the display. We cannot see any execution of the code in the debug folder. So that's the beauty of that release mode. You cannot execute the code within the debug. That is the difference. You cannot also in runtime, you cannot also figure it out what is the value of your sum like this. It's in release mode. You cannot debug anymore in the release mode. Okay, let's move to the trace mode. So what is trace mode? So trace mode is basically, it's a optional debug logging in both the builds, in release also and debug also. So you can also log with the help of trace mode. So it allows writing a logs in both debug and release mode. So before using trace keyword, you have to add your namespace system.diagnostic, and this is can be controlled by the trace compiler, and is basically much more useful for logging or figuring out the, or for checking up the health of your application without exposing any debug information in your application. So let's see the C# code. So just after this, I will say trace dot write line, and I will say running in trace mode. Okay, let's convert in debug. Debug. Okay. Save. Build. Open folder. obj debug. You can see this. So let's debug it. So if you debug, see this trace.write line is executed, and you can see in the output folder running in trace mode, debug only output, not in the release mode. So it's in debug mode. You can see the debug mode writing, the trace.write line is writing in output window. So you can check your application's output, Visual Studio's output window, where you can see the trace write line will be displayed over here. Let's move to the next slide. So if you can see that there are two build modes, debug and release. Console output, you can see both output will be displayed for both in both the cases, and debug.writeLine output is only in the debug mode. You can see in the debug mode only. There will be no output window on the release mode, so it will be only can able to see this whatever write you will whatever string you will write in the write line debug.writeLine. It can be visible in debug mode. And for the trace.writeLine output, yes, in the both the mode you can see there is a trace.writeLine output will be displayed. Let's move to the next slide. So how to switch modes in Visual Studio. So I already show you in the examples, but let's go through again. So as of now, you can see by default is the debug mode is there. So you are in the debug mode. Even if you check into the properties window, the configuration is set into actively debug mode. So you are in as of now debug mode, and by default also you are in debug mode only. So you can see the keyword debug is already there, and you cannot see any release keyword. And even though if it is in debug mode, you can able to understand this is very visible. And in the if it is in release mode code, in the release mode you cannot, you can see that is a grayed out, so it's commented actually. Okay, so whenever if you click build of your project, so it's built in debug mode, you have to go and into the folder, open folder in the file explorer of your application, and in the obj folder you can see the debug folder is created, and within the debug folder you can see application.exe file is created, and there is a symbol file which is useful for the debugging the debug code, which is nothing but a symbol file, program database files. It contains all the debug information. Now you have to switch to the release mode, so you have to do click on that drop down. You can see release mode is there. You have to select that release mode, go to the application, right click and go to the properties, and in the properties you can see configuration is release mode. If it is in debug mode, if you have to just select release, and here if it is empty, you have to just add your symbol actually release. Save, go to the program and see release is get automatically enabled. So you can see the release keyword, and this is visible actually, and in the debug mode code is getting grayed out. So if you do right click, build the solution, right click, properties, not properties, go to the open file folder, application obj release folder is created. You can see the exe is created in the release folder. So that is the, you can switch the release to debug and debug to release like this. Let's get to the next slide. So this folder we already show that the .p file which contains all the debug information, the debugger folder, and bin release folder is created, and within that exe file is created. Let's move to the next slide. So in the real world use cases are like in the debug mode. So while writing a new code, you can always be using a debug mode, because we are developing new things. We have to understand our code flow as well the variables values. So we have to, whenever we write new feature or anything code, new code, we have to use debug mode only. And it is very useful in during the unit testing. You have to write a unit testing for each of every functionality. You have to cover 100% of your code coverage and the unit testing. So it's very useful for this unit testing when writing a unit test. Also, after application is get into the production, there are multiple chances of raising the bug from the client side. So we have to investigate code by code. So during the investigation, we have to always use debug mode. So we can understand how the flow getting some errors or exceptions, and which variables are not in properly valued, or if it is null, we have to catch the nulls as well. So in those kind of investigation, we have to use debug mode. And release mode is mostly is for once your application is developed, you have to release into the production environment. So while doing production deployment, release mode is useful. Even you have to share your exes, your application with some other clients, which the clients is nothing to take anything about the code. They are not interested going through the code and the values. They are only have to how the UI looks like, and how they have to which we have represent the application. So it's a that time you're sharing your exes applications to the client. So that is the release mode is important. And also within the release mode, we already understood the performance is get optimized. So optimization has been done in the release mode only. Let's move to the next slide. So if you compare with the debug versus release, so this feature, let's go one by one. So debug mode is used in development, release mode is used in deployment. Speed wise, if we go to the speed wise, so we have to debug line by line each and every code, so it will be the slower, and release mode is faster. Debugging tool obviously is enabled into the debug mode, and it is disabled into the release mode. Code size will be the larger in the debug mode, because there is a lots of lines is added for debugging, providing debugging information. So the code size of the debug mode is large and release mode is smaller. Optimizing code, obviously if the code is large, so the optimization of the code in the debug mode is low, no, and release is yes. Breakpoints is obviously supported in the debug mode, so we have to add the breakpoint in the code, any code line numbers, which has to be get the value of that. So we have to use the breakpoints in the debug mode. And there is no debugging in the release mode, so breakpoint is not supported. Next is debug.writeLine, which will works for in the debug mode, and it does not work in the release mode. Trace.writeLine works for in the both the cases. And let's move to the next slide. Okay, best practice summary. It's like kind of a summary what we saw in the earlier slides. So best practices are for the use debug while developing and testing. We already studied about it. Use release before deployment. Use trace less important logging, not a critical one. So if it is not such important logging is there, so we will use trace. Never deploy apps built in debug mode. So obviously you always be using debug mode for the developing and testing purpose only, but we are not going to deploy it in the production in this mode. That is for in the production only. Release mode is used to be taken forward. Combined logging frameworks like nlog with trace, so it will be much more informative if you use nlog and even trace mode and in the debug mode. Congratulations, we learned the difference between debug, release and trace mode in Visual Studio, and how each affects how your application runs. If you found this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next tutorial.